Good afternoon, guys. I wanted to do a quick video to show you guys how you can use a call event with an operation specified in order to trigger a state change. So this is something that can be a little bit tricky unless you know a few little tips for how to accomplish this. So what we'll do is start with a simple architecture. So we will create a block definition diagram. And in that block diagram, we will create a system block. And then inside of that system block, we will create a state machine. So we will go to create diagram and then state machine, and we will use a simple off state to an on state. And what I'd like to do is use an operation call to trigger this state change. So inside of the system block, what I'm going to do is create an operation. So if you just click this little plus sign here, that's an easy way to use the smart manipulator options that you have and create operation. So this one, I'm just going to name it mix concrete, for example. All right. And now I'm going to take that operation that is now in the containment tree and drag that onto the transition between the off and the on state. So an operation call to the mixed concrete operation, or a call event to the mixed concrete operation, will trigger this state change from off to on. So if you were to go ahead and run that now, what you'll see is you don't have anything that's actually calling that operation, so it's not going to transition to the on state. So in the off state, let's create an operation that will, or create a call event that will call that operation. So there's two different ways you could go about doing this. One of those is to create a sequence diagram, and one of those is to create an activity diagram. So let's start out with the method of using a sequence diagram or an interaction behavior to do that. So in the off state, what I'm going to do is go to the specification and create a do behavior, and that do behavior type will be an interaction that we will display on a sequence diagram. So do behavior, drop down menu, interaction, and we'll name this mix concrete. So as you see here, there's now an interaction as the do behavior for the off state. I know that doesn't quite make sense with the off state, but let's just go with that. So inside of this, if I double click that now, it will take us to that state or that sequence diagram. So what I can do is drag the system block out here as a lifeline. And I'm going to shrink this up a little bit so we can display this on our other screen as well. But it's very simple. All you have to do is create a return to self message. And then we'll drag that operation onto the transition that goes back to self. So now if I go back to the state machine, we can select this diagram in the containment tree, go back to the state machine diagram, and drag the diagram out here so we can display that and watch this happen. When we do a simulation on this, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. We will run with context, hit play. It should go from in the off state, it'll do this behavior mix concrete, which caused that interaction, and it did the mix concrete operation and is now in the on state. So that is a simple, easy way to do that. The other thing you can do, I'm going to actually delete this completely. The other thing you can do is create an activity diagram. So if we delete this sequence diagram, we will select it in the containment tree and just completely get rid of this. So what we can do now is go back and create an activity diagram or an activity behavior inside of the off state that will also call that operation. So we go to the off state specification, we will use a do behavior and an activity, and we'll name it the same thing. So we'll do mix concrete, close that out. Now if I double click on this, it'll take us to that activity. And the one tricky little part of this that you need to keep in mind is if you just drag an operation out onto your activity, it's actually not going to execute properly and it will not cause that state transition. So let's say we were to create an initial node and use a control flow that went to that mixed concrete operation. Well, it's going to time out on us for one thing. So let's say we display that in the state machine diagram as well. So we'll select that in containment tree and go back to our state machine, drag that out and view that. So now we can try this out, but it will not properly work. So it times out there. So what we can do, we'll just get rid of this initial node. The way you have to go about doing this is to use a read self action. So if you go to your action list over here, there's a drop down menu and you can go to any action and then use a read self action. So there's a whole list of these UML actions and one of those is a read self action. And if we connect the output pin with an object flow that goes to that mixed concrete, it'll actually read the system block, actually, because that's what we're inside of right now, is the system block. It'll read that as the operation call. So when I execute this state machine now, it will call that behavior or start executing the activity called mixed concrete. That will read the system block, and then it will execute that operation of mixed concrete, which will then cause that transition. So let's watch this happen. And there you go. Of course, one of the really neat things about activities and transitioning to other states is that when you get to another state, now you can define the behaviors of that state. So, let's say you had an entry behavior that would be uninterruptible, something that you would execute upon entering the on state, such as perform a bit check or something like that. You could start defining those behaviors in here as well. So let's say we went to the on state and we went to specification, and as an entry behavior, we did another activity, and we'll call it perform bit check, which most of you will probably know means built-in test check. So let's go to that activity now, and let's say we had an initial node, and then we wanted to do an action which was check or perform bit. And we could connect that with a control flow and then a activity final. So let's display that on the other diagram now. Selecting containment tree, go back to our state machine, and we'll display that as well. So now when we run this, we should see that when it gets to the on state, it will go through and actually perform a bit check. So then you'd actually have to go down into what would be the bit check itself, but that's how you call that activity using that state. Thanks for watching, guys.